you and no one else. Okay, so welcome everyone. I hope everyone can hear us okay. And apologies for the late start. I had trouble getting in to the GoToWebinar system, but I'm in now. I'm Alison Pepperell and I'm a co-chair of the Charity Special Interest Group of the Institute of Risk Management, alongside Paula Carlson-Brown. Joining me on this presentation is Charlotte Candy. Charlotte is one of the people that was a key contributor to the publications on emerging risks that we're going to have a look through. And she works for ACOM as a consultant working with various types of organisations. She also has a personal interest in a local charity. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Charlotte?
No, I think that's it for now, and we'll explore some of the practical examples from the organisations I support later on.
Lovely. Okay. So today I'm just going to talk about the SIG a little bit for anyone who's new, and I think there are a few people. Then we're going to go straight into an introduction to emerging risk management for charities, and a little bit on tackling emerging risk management. I'm going to finish on some really useful information that I've seen within the Resilience Reimagined document, and then we'll take questions. There are going to be 3 polls throughout the presentation, and you're answering anonymously, so please do that. Also, you're welcome to ask questions as we go, because we're very lucky that Steph Jackson is going to collate them all and then ask them to Charlotte and I at the end. So feel free to go on and do that. So just talking about the Charity Special Interest Group for the moment, we're a SIG committee of 9 people with 2 co-chairs and an events lead at the moment. I'm actually stepping down shortly, and Steph is moving up to be co-chair, and I'll remain on the committee of 9. We see our main job as providing practical risk information to the charity sector, which is developed with the charity sector, and we mainly do that through events and publications. We do have a closed LinkedIn group, but it has been a bit of an uphill struggle to get any traction there. But you're very welcome to join and make it a bit more interactive. So on the events side, the boxes you can see on your screen are some past events. And originally we did probably have 2 to 3 half-day seminars a year, but post-pandemic, if you like, or during the pandemic, we obviously switched to online. I think that's been a good thing because it's been a bit more inclusive for people who operate outside London. And we've also added the coffee catch-ups, which were a brilliant idea of Steph's, which just we kick off with an expert or 2 talking for 5 minutes on their specialist subject, and then it's a free-for-all, a conversation, if you like. The publications are the other main thing that we produce, and we did produce the Getting Started with Risk Management, our first main publication, back in 2015, which we updated in 2018. We did that because ISO 31000 was updated, and you can see here some of the documents that are available for free to anyone on our webpage of the Institute of Risk Management website. The Getting Better one is quite interesting if you want to know how mature your risk management is. Setting risk appetite, we've had a lot of feedback that's helpful for when you have to show that in report and accounts. And just the useful tools are probably things that aren't exactly risk management, such as, for example, the stakeholder mapping toolkit that we've included, but they're just things which we think people will find useful. So moving on to what we're talking about today, emerging risk. You can see, although I realise now two of them are identical, but you can see that during 2021, through the sterling work of the working group, we managed to issue 3 publications, and they're all on the webpage. The first one was an introduction to emerging risks and how to identify emerging risks. The second is about assessing and treating or tackling and risk managing emerging risks. And the last one that we published towards the end of 2021 is an introduction to emerging risks, is about embedding emerging risks. And there we found the best thing to do is probably to lean on the strategic planning or business planning cycle. Feedback indicates that's probably the best place for talking about how to embed it. So we wanted to start somewhere, and we found when we had our first working group meeting, by the way, I should say, anyone that contributes to the publications gets a mention in the front of each publication. So if you want your name in lights, do consider stepping up and joining a future working group. I know Paula has the 2022 publication in sight, so we're after ideas for that. Please use the comments box for anything that you think of. Anyway, definitions is always a good place to start. And the first meeting established that this type of risk management for emerging risks is simply not business as usual. And we ended up identifying 7 characteristics that make emerging risks different. And I'm going to read these out because I won't remember them all. So we found that emerging risks tend to be ambiguous, chaotic, complex, with a moving time horizon, uncertain, uncontrollable, and volatile. And on page 7 of the guide, there's full explanations as to how we reach that conclusion. Emerging risks can sit in the background for decades, you could argue the pandemic, and they can develop quickly and really bite you. You could also argue the pandemic. One thing I'd definitely put out there is, yes, there are some risks that sit there for ages and then come charging towards you and then disappear as a non-risk, if you like. And for those of you of a certain age, I would reference Y2K for that, undoubtedly. The working group ended up with 3 categories. A new risk in a known context, so it's your organisation, and let's say you're an animal charity, but around the corner there's a change of regulation, a new risk that's going to, or the regulation is going to generate new risks that you need to think about within your known context. There are known risks in new contexts. So let's say, again, you're an animal charity, but you want to set up a children's creche for your employees at the head office. So you don't do anything with children, so it's a new context. But a lot of people do things with children. So on the whole, it's probably a known risk, especially if you do your research. The biggest and scariest is probably new risk in a new context. So you start something new and new risks emerge from there. Another area we wanted to think about within the introduction to emerging risks is why people avoid them. And it's really not difficult to understand this because they are so ambiguous, chaotic, complex, etc., that it's quite easy to stick your head in the sand, shrug your shoulders and put them in the too difficult bucket. I'm not going to spoil Charlotte's thunder, but she's got an excellent example of people thinking it's the silly bucket. So you'll hear that a bit later. The other reason, and probably a very genuine, logical reason, is the sheer lack of information. And we're used to having lots of information to hand, some of which will be quantifiable information as well. So you're kind of working a little bit in the dark, or in the twilight at least. Why would you want to tackle emerging risks? Well, I think recent history has shown that if you do tackle them ahead of time, you can build and maintain resilience to survive and thrive. So who would you want to involve in a conversation around emerging risks? Undoubtedly the leadership team. And as I said earlier, the business planning cycle is a good way to get this up there and in front of them, and can actually be viewed, in my experience, as a bit of fun on top of some areas that might be less fun. Trustees need to be involved, of course, because ultimate responsibility often sits with them, if not always. And I would bang the drum for external experts. So thinking about who you've got within your wider stakeholder groups of professional advisors, academics, and anyone who's actually external but could add value to the conversation. So think broadly. In terms of how to tackle it, again, the first publication, An Introduction to and Identifying, is where you'll find information around PESTLE, SWOT and horizon scanning, and other areas as well. And what we wanted to do is, within the publication, is say what each of these is, why you might find it useful, and how to use the technique. So that's all there for you. I think starting with PESTLE makes a lot of logical sense. PESTLE obviously stands for political, economic, social, technology, legal and environment. And categorising risk in that way often makes it easier for people to think of risk. One thing I would say is you should try not to get caught up into thinking, well, does this risk sit there, there or there? And encourage others not to get hung up on that. The main thing is to get the risk down on paper. I'd advocate, and I have done this once or twice, getting people to do the PESTLE before you have a review meeting, because what you'll find is, not surprisingly, the old 80-20 rule comes into play. So 80% of the risks that people think about are the same across a cohort of people, and it's the 20% that then becomes the more interesting areas. So you could then focus the review meeting on the 20% perhaps, or pick from both. But that review meeting is for you to then think about, are these all relevant? Are they all emerging risks? Are some of them risks that we're handling anyway, but maybe whoever mentioned them doesn't appreciate that? So again, it's a bit of a conversation and a brainstorm. The SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, is great once you've got your risks lined up. Maybe you're focusing on 2, 3, 4, and you want to really drill into that and understand for your organisation what that risk means. How could you handle it? What strengths have you got in order to manage that risk? What weaknesses, what opportunities does it bring? What threats does it bring? So again, to make a meeting effective and shorter, personally, I would ask people to produce a SWOT before the second meeting. And there's an example of a SWOT on page 12 of the document, just to give, or to start the thinking, if nothing else. The final thing to mention is horizon scanning, which a lot of people know about these days, but not everyone by any means. Now, the IRM's Innovation SIG has a brilliant horizon scanning booklet that you can read through. And we hope ours, or the area within our guide on horizon scanning, also, again, tells you what it is, why it might be useful and how to use it. The big thing with horizon scanning is looking externally. So the PESTLE is looking external, but only by you. The SWOT is only your organisation considering your position. Horizon scanning takes it to another level. It's what else is out there. And the best way to do that is probably online, but also talking to experts, talking to academics, climate change experts, if that's an area you want to drill into and learn more about, cyber risk experts, anyone and everyone. And the objective here is to see those risks over the horizon, as it were. So hopefully that's given you a quick run through the 3 methodologies available. And as I say, there are more, and some of them much more complex within the second document, Tackling Emerging Risk. Now don't panic, your eyes haven't gone funny. You're not meant to be able to read what's in these blobs. This is a neat way of taking the PESEL information, banding it by time period. So the centre is probably what you know about now and understand now. The second ring is around impacts between 2 to 5 years, and the outer ring is 5 to 10 years, which is generally speaking where the emerging risks will sit. They're categorised, they're RAG rated, they're easy to follow, and a great thing to present to a trustee board, along with the explanation of how you've got there. So 1 or 2 tips. I would be very careful when you're producing this document and having your meetings around dominant personalities, sort of the hysteria of the day, if you like, the fads and all of those sort of things. Our role is to challenge and question and say, is that really a problem here for us? Because sometimes it can be somebody's hobby horse. Okay, I'm going to hand on to Charlotte. I'm sure you've heard enough of my voice by now. So, Charlotte.
Thank you, Alison. So we're going to start with looking at how we identify emerging risks. This gives a bit of the context, the example to give shortly. So a start of 10 might be looking inside your organisation, see what themes have been coming up in recent boards, anything that's changing in the industry that you work in. Looking at expert opinion, using the IRM Innovation Group, like Alison's already mentioned. And the World Economic Forum is one of my favourite places to find sources of risk information, because it's not just this year, it's 2, 3, even 10 years into the future. And if you start reviewing them on a yearly basis, you start to see a picture of, they're not perfect, they don't always predict, they can't predict the future. But if you look at the one for 2021, there is a strong emphasis on infectious diseases. Now we're starting to move on in 2022 to things like climate change. And that gives you a really good basis to start looking at the things that are going to affect your organisation in the future or now. So climate change, the use of AI, 5G, mass migration. A lot of things are becoming more technical biased at the moment, just because of the huge shift in how things have changed in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. It's created new areas that didn't exist as areas of risk for projects, organisations, until recently. So I'm going to use an example. My example is not in relation to a charitable organisation. I predominantly work in infrastructure projects, and it really doesn't matter whether a project or organisation has a small budget or a large budget. Horizon scanning is really very valuable. So on the next slide, I think is my example. So I've worked previously in the nuclear sector, and picture this scenario. We are in 2016. We're just discussing things like Brexit. Will that happen? And what happened is I've been reviewing our business risk profile and saying, well, we're very reactive. We need to be more proactive. Sorry, Alison, could you move it along for me?
Oh, I beg your pardon.
That's okay. So, and on another one, please. So, just to give you a bit of context, that is the site in question that we're discussing. It's just a flat site. What we're going to discuss probably doesn't seem realistic in the context of what you can physically see at the moment. So I looked at the risk profile, thought, oh, this is very reactive, and I've been to board several times, and I said, what can we do differently? I said, well, how about we look to the future? And we considered doing some horizon scanning. And the first question was, what is that? It was something the board were doing, but just not necessarily risk lens. So I said, I will set one up just before we're about to work out what we're going to spend our funds on for the next financial year. I arrived to the board, they're used to seeing me, so it wasn't as daunting. But I started the conversation with, it's 2016. We are a nuclear organisation. Let's consider some of the risks. Oh, we've covered them, we always cover safety, we always do this. And so what about the others? What about this scenario, that Brexit occurs? And I was told, don't be silly, that won't happen. We had a European supply chain. The next one was, we were an American-owned business. And I said, what happens if Donald Trump becomes president? And the third one, with bearing in mind we were a nuclear sector company at the time, what happens if Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister? And it was very evident what his stance was on the industry that we worked in. And I was practically laughed out of the room because don't be so silly, these things won't happen. But we continued the activity and we created 16 new strategic risks from our horizon scanning because we considered what would happen in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. And everyone was quite content. We identified some risks. They all thought it was a little bit silly, but left me to it. But the reason I could support them is I used all our in-house expertise. I had a chat to our finance team, our legal team, our regulatory team, all the people that I could get a bit of information about what do you think we're not considering or what's happening in your sector that we're not seeing with the right lens. Research. Look at the World Economic Forum. I looked at numerous different resources to find out what could happen, and used it as the starter for 10. As silly as some people thought this task was, the way we engaged them, we've shown them graphics of how these risks could be visualized, really started to get them in, and they were, oh, well, have we considered how we're going to deal with cyber fraud? Have we considered actually continuity of staff in leadership positions? We started to look at some of the things that we were just considering to be business as usual. We're learning from our past experiences. Had we had an incident that we could have avoided if we'd just been a little bit more proactive? Then we did some scenario planning. So after this session, this session happened in March 2016, I went off and I created a map of all the risk options that could come out of Brexit occurring. So looked at our supply chain, looked for opportunities as well that could come from this change in environment for us. And I created this lovely risk map of this scenario as a pre-mortem. And the words were, I don't know why you've done that, it will never happen. So I put it in my desk drawer and thought nothing of it until later in that year when, as soon as we understood what the Brexit vote outcome was, I had a phone call from my MD saying, Charlotte, we really need to have a discussion about the implications of Brexit. And I could confidently go to his office and say, don't worry, about the finite detail at the moment, here are some broad ideas of how it could affect us. And at this moment in time, we need to wait for more information before we can make a decision. So if we move on to the next slide, that scenario I've just explained is a very mature risk organisation. It doesn't mean that that's the option for every organisation. So you really need to understand what the capability and the preferences are of your organisation. It could be a simple approach of high, medium, low. It could be looking at impact and likelihood if you're at that stage. It could be the full approach of what if scenarios like I've just been explaining. I've also had to do that for a number of clients with how the impact of COVID is on their delivery of projects and services. And early days, I was being asked, okay, so how do we know how late we're going to be? How do we know how much more money we need? And I was very honest and said, I cannot tell you categorically. Unfortunately, we won't know this until after the event, but these are a range of scenarios that you can use. And then the most advanced level that we could get to is an assured approach. And that is quite labour intensive. So it really is for large organisations where they've got the resources to support these things. Move on. Okay, so very much like we've discussed with risks, emerging risks are treated very similarly. And we look at the 4 T's. And we look at ways that we can treat risks. So some emerging risks we may be able to treat. What can a charity do to survive? And for some things, unfortunately, we just have to accept that the risk may happen. We tolerate it, and we're just ready to react. And that was very much the case for a lot of organisations when it came to COVID. Transferring risks. Now, these can be transferred to a third party, such as an insurance company. It doesn't necessarily stop the risk happening. It's just the impact is not as prevalent to your organisation. And then the final T being terminate. You could stop doing something which basically removes this risk. That is not always an option if you want to have business continuity as well. So in the publication, there is a wealth of information about how to treat emerging risks. And there's a great example within the appendix of the publication. And I'm going to hand you back to Alison, who's going to be discussing resilience.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. So I kind of stumbled across Resilience Reimagined some time ago. And it was one of those eureka moments when I read it. It was like, oh my goodness, this turns risk management on its head, was my first response to it. And then I realised, no, it doesn't, but it does give you different tools to use and different ways of thinking. And it's so well with emerging risk management, I had to plug it here. It was written primarily by Rick, who's from Deloitte, and David, who's from Cranfield University. And they collaborated with others to come up with the publication, Resilience Reimagined. We were lucky enough in May 2021 to get them on a webinar. And again, that webinar recording is available on the webpage. So please, it's worth looking at that booklet, and it's worth listening to what they have to say about it. And I've just picked out 2 things from the whole of the, I think it's about a 50-page publication, but incredibly easy to read, which are the 7 practices for resilient organisations. And again, if you read the whole book, you'll understand what an EO is, an essential outcome, and what that might look like for you. The whole focus is on creating adaptive leadership. And that's the way their research has shown that the good organisations continue and thrive through all sorts of immense disasters and crises. And this is kind of their maturity model, if you like. So you might start out and have a look at this and think, as Charlotte said earlier, gosh, that's a reactive organisation if there ever was one. But actually that might be fine for the organisation you are. I'd argue it probably isn't, but you know your organisation's best. And certainly moving to adaptive feels the right thing to do, to kind of really, if not guarantee your future, give you the best opportunities to succeed and to thrive. So that's everything for now. I'm sorry my camera has been a bit intermittent, but we've finished the presentation. I hope we've inspired you to look into emerging risk management more, to take a look at the webpage, to get active within the SIG.